On this episode of the Oklahoma Breakdown with Ikard and Lehman, presented by Metro Ford of OKC, we've got an interview with ESPN's Bill Connelly. We talked to Bill about analytics' role in football, the SP Plus ranking system that he invented, and we dive into his list of the top 60 college quarterbacks of the 2000s, which has six OU guys on it. It is a really interesting interview. Please download and subscribe to the podcast, rate it 5 stars, and write us a good review. Follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Just search Oklahoma Breakdown on any of those, and you'll find us. All right. Our man Mike Hosty will kick this thing off. It's time for the Oklahoma Breakdown. It's a beautiful Monday, March 8th, and you're listening to the Oklahoma Breakdown with Ikard and Lehman, presented by Metro Ford of OKC. Metro Ford of OKC's inventory is the best of the best. In fact, they own more Black Widows and more 2021 F-150s than anybody else. They're the only Roush and Rocky Ridge dealer in the state. You can find a ride at Metro Ford of OKC that you can't find anywhere else in the state of Oklahoma. Just like their selection of vehicles is unmatched, so is their customer service. The Metro Ford of OKC Difference Program is included with the purchase of every new and pre-owned vehicle. It includes free oil changes for life, lifetime window tint, lifetime nitrogen fill for your tires, complimentary wheel locks, interior fabric protection, complimentary service loaners, a complimentary shuttle with service, and a complimentary multi-point inspection. Come feel the performance when you test drive a Roush or Raptor, and come see why the difference is real at Metro Ford of OKC. Visit metrofordofokc.com for more information, or go to the dealership and tell them we sent you. Now, we are recording this a few days early because I'm on vacation, but we would never leave you high and dry, people. We've got an awesome interview with Bill Connelly from ESPN. Teddy, I feel like he made us smarter because he's a lot smarter than us. I think that's safe to say.
It made me feel dumb and lazy because there's so much data entry and all of that stuff that goes into what if I had a preseason top 25 list, I'd look at last year's list to see where it ended up and then basically just free will it off of that. He puts ton of data into what he does. There's a method to the madness. That was just really cool.
Yeah, and lots of OU talk. And it's just fascinating. The analytics portion of things have grown so much. And Bill Connelly is one of the guys that have kind of led the way, especially from a college football perspective. So we hope you guys enjoy this. It's a lot of fun, but you're going to learn a lot. So buckle up. Here's Bill Connelly. It is our pleasure to be joined by a writer for ESPN. He is also everyone's favorite college football nerd. Those are his words, not mine. And oh yeah, he invented his own ranking system this one time, the SP Plus. You may have heard of it. Bill Connelly is in the house. What's going on, Bill?
I just like to clarify, I claim the nerd part. I don't think I'm many people's favorite at this exact moment in time, but I'll claim at least the nerd part.
That's the funny thing about lists like this is,
oh man,
no matter it doesn't matter what the list says. You could have came out with 5 different versions of this list and you would have the same amount of people pissed off.
Oh yeah, no, it was a guarantee. Like when we came up with the idea 2 months ago, I just kind of laughed. Like I knew how mad people would be, and I didn't even know what the rankings were going to be yet. And I was needless to say very correct about the general anger that it produced.
Oh, I can only imagine. And we'll get to that list.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get to your list that has everyone that has a radio show or TV show or anything like that talking about the top 60 quarterbacks of the 2000s. But I did want to ask you some questions about SP Plus before we got to the QB list, because I've always found it so interesting. At what point in your life did you decide, you know what, I'm going to invent my own ranking system? Like the rest of these ranking systems suck. We need to incorporate numbers a little more. Like, why did you do it? Is I guess my question, like what motivated you to invent your own ranking system for college football?
Well, I mean, the biggest motivation was it didn't exist. This was, you know, I'm a Mizzou guy. I was starting a Mizzou blog in like 07, which was a pretty good time to start a Mizzou blog. as it turned out, but I was hungry for content. Basically, I was trying to figure out what I was going to write about in the off season that could be semi unique and interesting. And I realized, I love baseball, advanced stats. I love baseball stats, hate baseball. What's actually out there for the sport I like? And, I'm pretty sure it was a literal Google college football analytics thing. And, there was nothing. There was, it took me to Football Outsiders, the pro stuff. They had a little bit of college stuff that they were just getting started with, but I realized this was a wide open space. And so I just started pulling in like some of the baseball ideas I really liked. How does that translate? Started, entering play-by-play data into Excel sheets at work, while still getting my work done, of course. But they didn't complain, but and just feeling it out, and the first stab at SP Plus back when I had an ampersand that I had to remove at a later date, it basically stood for success rate. That was the S. That was the efficiency part. It was basically like an on base plus slugging thing. Success rate was the efficiency part, and points per play, basically equivalent points per play, was the slugging percentage. So it was just, I was attempting to kind of look at things at the explosiveness side of things, the efficiency side of things, and just kind of feel things out. And it was a lot of trial and error. This was 2007, so it's been many iterations through the years. And at some point, I think it actually became good. It sure wasn't at first, but and so here we are. I keep trying to, over these last few years, I've really tried to talk to as many coaches as possible and understand the actual game, like what actually decides things, and figure out how to measure that, see if it makes my numbers better. And it's taken I've really enjoyed the process. It's taken me to some pretty interesting places.
Well, I think one of the difficult things has to be, you mentioned 2007, the sport is completely different than it was in 2007. It's played differently. It's played at a different tempo. Teams value different things now than they did then. So that's got to make it difficult. Okay, so my question is, when did you look at it, tinker with all of your data and how you're gonna rate these different things, and then look at it maybe at the beginning of the year or end of the year and say, dang, that was pretty good. I like that. And whenever you did that, was your first thing to then say, how does this work with gambling? Am I going to, because I feel like that's like the natural next step, is if you can find a formula that shows how teams should be ranked, well, then the next step is the same formula should predict who's going to win the matchup.
It's funny. Like, I wasn't necessarily thinking about the gambling side of things. Many other people were. That's definitely how that was orbiting around a lot of people's heads. And so that's when I started posting weekly picks at I think Football Study Hall back when I was with SB Nation, just to kind of have it out there so everybody could see if it was a good measure or not. And it was decent measure. At least it was, typically it'll get 52 to 54% against the spread for the year, which that's every game. You would never bet every game. Somebody tried to do that a couple of years ago, one of my followers, and I begged him every week not to, but you can get a little bit there. I've always treated it as like the first step when it comes to gambling. Like, here's what SP Plus says. It's not taking these injuries into account. You can adjust however you need to there, but it seems like a good suggestion, a good starting point, and people seem to like it for that. This last season was just a mess in every possible way. I think it was like 51%. It was never going to do incredibly well in a pandemic year where the depth charts are changing every week. But to circle back to your first question, like when I realized maybe there's something good here, that was the good part about having a Mizzou blog, is it was just a constant sandbox. Like, I could just constantly experiment on kind of a small scale, like just within the Big 12 there, and then the SEC. I eventually got involved with Football Outsiders, and that was a good place to write at. Their community is a lot of smart people in that community. They give me a lot of really good ideas. They had seen Aaron Schatz, how his pro numbers had developed through the years. So it was a very, I don't know the best word, but a pretty savvy crowd to talk to about this. And I had a weekly column there. So I definitely learned a lot in those early years. And then it was just a matter of, getting better at the math side of things, figuring out the best way to adjust for opponents. That's always going to be the biggest part for a college football measure when, you've got a tiny sample size and minimal connectivity from conference to conference, especially in 2020. And just like feeling those out, trying a bunch of different things and adding pieces or changing the weighting of this or that and all that. It's I probably tinker too much, especially this last year, but it's good for tinkering, that's for sure.
So I assume that it's changed a lot from what you've kind of described from where you started. So now, what are the main components for SP Plus? Like, how do you get to the rankings that you're putting out now? Like, are there just a couple main components? I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but what are the main things you're looking at now?
The biggest, this is crazy to say, but the biggest part of the equation remains success rate. Just I adjusted kind of, I know coaches will say like get 4 yards on first down and half your necessary yardage on second. Normally that's where coaches usually set the bar. Figured out the best place to set the bar would be like 50% on first down, 70% on second, 100% on third or fourth. Bang. That number is the most sustainable thing about football. Like that's the way even if you're good at making big plays, you still don't really know when they're going to come. It often comes with a certain amount of risk or randomness or whatever. The efficiency aspect of the game is by far the thing that is most in your control. And so if you're creating a predictive system, you're going to lean the most heavily on the things that are most in team's control. And it's the simplest measure possible besides yards per play, I guess. And it is extremely effective for me. How I adjust for opponent, all those other things after I've kind of derived those original numbers, that's changed a lot and it still changes. But the raw success rate number, I think it's a gateway drug for analytics as a whole, because it's super easy to understand. If you played football, you heard coaches give some sort of example of it in terms of staying on schedule. And
Stay ahead of the chains.
Exactly. And it is remarkably effective and predictive overall.
I'll tell you, there's a couple of things interesting. So I would guess it's not very long ago that, and Mike Leach kind of still does it. He's got a little piece of paper there and he calls the game by field. Now he's done the same exact thing for a long time. So there is kind of a methodical nature to it. But my guess is that the more data driven and the more analytical football has become, the easier it can make what you do. Does that make sense? It seems like there's a more analytical nature to the way coaches approach games and call plays and down and distance and what works and what doesn't. And they kind of stick to that formula.
Yeah, it is funny with coaches. I mean, on game day itself, it's Sunday through Friday. You're just basically like honing your instincts, and then your instincts just go where they go on Saturday. You just hope they're honed in the right ways. But I definitely, PFF, Championship Analytics, the group that has, they give binders to all their teams in terms of here's when you go for it on fourth down in these situations, here's the score and the down and distance and all that. I think there have been certain companies that have come about that are you still kind of have to trust them. The first time you decide to look at the book for when to go for it. I think with certain head coaches, if you go for it and you don't get it that one time, you're throwing the binder away. But just generally, I do think there are more companies. I think there are more. It's slowly making headway in that regard. And yeah, I mean, at that point, you'll never hear a coach like give full. Oh yeah, I heed the analytics at all times. They always want to say, it has a time and a place, or and all that.
They don't want to give it any credit, because if you give all the credit to analytics,
right.
well, what the hell are we paying all this guy money for?
Exactly. Like you don't even need me anymore. Yeah. But I do think it's, that Sunday through Friday, I do think we're seeing it impact those instincts, so to speak, quite a bit. And I mean, if you ever get to the point where you can have computers in the press box, which we still can't, it's 2021 and we still can't do that. That is always kind of, I think that would take it even further, because then you can just being able to process a lot of information between plays or, in certain moments, I think helps a lot. The binder, like Championship really does give them a binder that they can search through, and that helps. But if they ever get to the point where they have computers or the sponsored iPads with the big Microsoft symbol on the back, like in the NFL, I think that would push things along even further.
Brought to you by Microsoft Surface.
Exactly. You got to say it every 38 seconds or the sponsorship expires. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so you did come out with your SP Plus preseason rankings a couple weeks ago, and I thought your methodology was really interesting, Bill, because you kind of threw out three main categories for your rankings, and it was recent recruiting, recent history, which basically is kind of success that the program has had.
Yeah.
But then one that you don't hear often is returning production. You hear returning starters a lot. What's the difference with returning production? Like, why do you look at returning production instead?
Well, I just realized a few years ago that, I've been, as I write the team previews every offseason, I used to write huge team previews at SB Nation. We've kind of divvied up my time a little different at ESPN. I still write division previews. I still update the rosters. I just realized I had a lot of information from year to year in spreadsheets about, who's back, who's not. And I could pretty easily calculate like percentage of rushing yards back and receiving yards and all these. I could figure out all these categories for a few years back. And I just, through the years, I think we all know that returning starters is not great. Just as like 14's good, 12's bad, 10's terrible. We kind of understand what it means, and we know what we're trying to get out of it. We're trying to figure out like how much experience does this team have and all that. But I just started to realize like maybe I could do this a little better. Maybe I could start, looking at where these teams were before the season, how much their SP plus rating, offense and defense, how much it changed based on whether they had 100% of their passing yards or 75 or whatever. And I started to realize that it really was a predictive thing. And I was able to tinker with the weights. So like, we know quarterback is a very important position. With like that turns out, it's very important. It's like 30% basically, of the overall offensive returning production formula, based on, what is most predictive. So I was able to kind of divvy out weights and figure out what is actually important. And at ESPN, I have a little bit more data about snap counts. Before I couldn't figure it. Like I was using like career starts returning for the offensive line, which was okay, but not great. But looking at just the percentage of snap counts from last year that return is huge. It's awesome. And so being able to dive into each unit, figure out what's most important. It's in theory, it's supposed to just be a more sophisticated returning starter number. And it's presented in a percentage that, it's pretty easy to understand. And it seems like it resonates pretty well, and it's super predictive too.
Quick break. First Fidelity Bank is a full-service financial institution based in Oklahoma with tailored solutions for all your personal and business needs. Checking accounts, saving accounts, home loans, and much more. They do it all. Whether it's online banking from your computer or mobile banking from your phone, everything is stress-free with FFB. Making mobile deposits, paying bills online, and moving money to different accounts could not be easier. First Fidelity Bank also provides free ATMs worldwide, making banking convenient wherever you are. They also give back to the community. FFB donates a total of more than $500,000 to local charities and educational foundations. Make your life easier and go bank at First Fidelity Bank. Visit ffb.com for more information. And don't forget to go buy some Rock and Roll Tequila. Rock and Roll Tequila is the ultra premium tequila that hits all the right notes. It's won all kinds of awards for its superior taste and smooth finish. To find a store that has it, visit rockandrolltequila.com or check out their Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. This stuff is fantastic. If you don't want to take our word for it, maybe you'll listen to this guy.
This is Coach Bob Stoops. When you're a college football coach, it's important to have an eye for talent. The same holds true when choosing your tequila. When I tried Rock and Roll, I liked it so much, I decided to become a partner in this Oklahoma-owned company. Crafted in the highlands of Jalisco, Mexico, the smooth taste of Rock and Roll's triple distilled platinum, or añejo, called Cristalino, and the incredible premium quality mango tequila are awesome. Our defiantly unique guitar-shaped bottles make it easy to find, and you'll love the ultra-premium quality and taste. No excuses. Make Rock and Roll your game day tequila. Tastefully rebellious, start the party with Rock and Roll.
So whenever you are putting together your preseason list and it's all the data has been crunched, you put all the numbers in, and you hit print or however it works,
Yep.
and here comes the list. Has there ever been a result that, let's say it's got Army number 6 or something? Has there ever been a result where it's like, I can't put them there?
Yeah.
I know the data says that, but I can't put them there, or people are going to think I'm crazy and it's going to throw this whole thing off.
Well, luckily this is college football, so we know Alabama is going to be number 1.
Right.
And in a given year, we know, like, I mean, the top 5 or top 4 this year is Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma, Ohio State. Like, I know if Army shows up in that among that crowd, then I clearly have the wrong formula linked to the wrong whatever, and I need to redo it. But yeah, I mean, I'll go back through and with anything that looks like a
but
slight
you never
outlier.
know though, right? Because like last year, Iowa
Mhm.
State was
Yeah.
a really good football team, and Baylor the year before.
Yep.
And no preseason number would have ever picked where they ended up. But I mean, there's some things that you could point to say that maybe that's there, and maybe a system like yours could have found that. But would you pull that out and put it somewhere else?
Well, I would never, if I would go back and check, I would go back and make sure, like, I didn't screw something up, right? Like, I didn't, I didn't accidentally say that their leading receiver had 10,000 yards last year, therefore they're returning, I'll go back and make sure I didn't make a manual mistake. But, it is, the factors involved, the recruiting rankings and the recent history, which really is, just a program health check, basically. Those things make it a pretty stable thing. Like, there aren't going to be that many surprises. This year is interesting though, because the idea of returning production with super seniors it's really different this year. Like, typically number 1, the top team in terms of overall returning production will be somewhere around like 86 to 88%. This year, when I crunched everything out, Louisiana was at 96%. UCLA and Miami were at 91%. The national average, and I'm still updating the G5 roster, so it continues to creep up, but on average, that number for the national average is typically like 63%. Right now it's like 70% and climbing. Everybody's returning more. And so the impact that has is going to be really interesting. The Pac-12, like, no senior in the Pac-12 was satisfied with the season they had last year for very obvious reasons. Everybody in the Pac-12 returns just a boatload of super seniors. And so in theory, I run the numbers and I've got, I had Oregon at 5, but then Shug transferred. So I think they dropped down a little bit, but then you've got Washington at 11, USC at 16, Arizona State at 8, or USC at 17, Arizona State 18, Utah 19, UCLA projected to improve by like 10 points per game because they return everybody. This year's going to kind of test the outer limits of what returning production can do for you. And Iowa State's projected 7th. They finished 11th last year. They're projected 7th because they returned just about everybody. We'll see. Like, do you hit your head on a seat? Like, at some point, do you just reach your upside and returning production can't help you anymore? Or do you just continue? Does continuity just continue to help you grow as a team? Iowa State and Miami actually are going to be the most interesting test cases, I guess, for that.
Bill, do you look at what your ratings ended up producing for Texas and you're like, okay, 20th is good. That's good. That's not, I didn't put them in the top 10 because right. I mean, it is one of those things. Every off season you see the Longhorns rated extremely high, but I would say 20th is reasonable. It feels reasonable.
It passes the reasonable test with both USC and Texas, I think, 17th and 20th. That seems like that seems too reasonable. I guess Miami's my outlier. Having Miami up at 8th is my former powers back team for the year. But I am curious. I am curious about Texas, just from the standpoint of well, a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with SP Plus at the moment. But they do return a lot on offense if Casey Thompson or whoever the quarterback is sticks, if Sark can work with him. I like their skill core a lot. Like, I think they have obvious potential to do better than 20th, but I like 20th. That's suggesting they're good, so you don't get yelled at too much, but it doesn't put them in the top 10 before they really need to be.
I hope I'm not getting too deep in the weeds, but I want to circle back to the returning production thing.
Yeah.
Because we've started to see something in college football that we've seen in the past, but it's going to be on a much more massive scale. take Oklahoma, for example, and it sparked, whenever you said Miami's returning production, it sparked for me because Charleston Rambo from Oklahoma is going to Miami. So it's not a returning production from Miami, but it's not a player that has no college experience. Right. So is there a way to weight that in if you have a really productive player that transfers to a place that lost a productive player?
Yeah, it's like it's almost like the Tennessee guys that are going to OU.
Right.
So you kind of stole my question, Ted, because I was going to ask him how that kind of factors in, like how he adjusts for that. Mind melt, same wavelength.
This is a really elegant and sophisticated thing. I mashed their stats into their new team stats. So as of now, Charleston, and it's tricky this year because everybody played such a drastically different number of games. So I had to basically scale everything as if everybody played exactly 12 games. But right now, Charleston Rambo is in Miami's stats for scaled up. That would be 340 receiving yards from last year. So he just gets thrown in. It gets tricky when a P5 team adds a G5 player or like an FCS player. I've had to figure out. I've started giving half credit for that basically, but when it's like for like, when it's P5 to P5, that seems to work pretty well. And so it does help a team sometimes, like, you'll lose your starting, OU knows this well, you'll lose your starting quarterback and go out of transfer. And then you end up returning like 50% of your passing yards from last year as opposed to 100%. And that kind of makes sense. I think it makes sense in my head. It seems to do good things for the numbers. But it is one of the most inelegant possible things, that is throw their stats in with their new team.
Okay, before we move on to the QB's list, got to ask you about Oklahoma. You've got them preseason number 3 in your SP Plus ranking. What do you think puts them there in your system? And then obviously you're a guy that actually watches the games and keeps close tabs on college football. It's not just the numbers. So what do you think of the Sooners for this upcoming season?
I mean, we've seen enough from the offense through the years to assume, we saw enough from Spencer Rattler last year after the first few games. I mean, even the first few games, he was still good. He just, the defense was letting him down. He threw picks late. He was still mostly good. And then he was very good the rest of the way. I mean, they're projected first in offense, which they've spent a lot of time at over the last 4, 5, 6 years. That makes sense. I guess this is where, I have to lean on the stats. My eyeballs loved Ronnie Perkins so much that I worry about losing him, seeing the impact he had when he basically hopped in mid-season. That defense just went to a completely different level. They finished 15th on defense. So they really don't lose much. You lose Perkins, you lose Stokes, a couple DBs, I guess, but the big pieces are there, and the big disruptive pieces. That's one of the things I've definitely, on the returning production scale, like the number of tackles for loss that you return ends up making almost as big a difference as tackles and passes defensed if you're for the secondary. Just that disruptive ability matters a lot. So losing Perkins hurt, but getting Thomas back, he had a ton of tackles for loss. Getting Benito back, obviously, it seems like from a number standpoint, what it's saying is, you got enough of last year's back, super efficient. That success rate measure I was talking about, 9th in success rate last year. When you gave up a big play, it was a really big play, but that efficiency thing, the numbers seem to trust that OU has enough returning that they can match basically last year. They're projected 16th. I mean, an OU team with a number 16 defense at this point, that sounds like a contender. It's been a while since they had a defense, I think, that ranked quite that high. They almost made the national title game with in what was that, 2017, where I think the defense was like 30th or something. So, I mean, yeah, if the defense can hit that mark, I don't know why they wouldn't be a contender.
So you were talking about Spencer Rattler in the offense and how much trust there is in that system. So it really kind of boils down to what happens defensively. But it made me think of the question, Spencer Rattler was a freshman last year. Is there ever a way that, do you predict that a freshman to his sophomore year is going to be the same? Or do you predict that a freshman to his sophomore year is going to get 10% better, 15% better? How does that work?
In the returning production equation itself, it's just basically do last year's yards come back. But I did something for Football Outsiders. God, it would have been like 11 years ago now. So who knows if it's still up to date, but it definitely, I was looking at, quarterbacks, especially when does their production improve? Like how much do they improve from redshirt freshman or true freshman to sophomore to junior or whatever? And it basically said like most of your improvement is done in the first 2 years on campus, which I guess kind of makes sense. That would have been, if I had just taken a logical stab, I would have probably said something to that effect. So if that's still up to date, and I really should probably circle back and try to figure that, set that all up again, see if it's still the same. If that's, it would make sense. And it would also suggest that this coming year is where Spencer Rattler will show the most improvement. And again, I mean, he cleared most of the bars he was given last year. So if he improves off of that, that's a really good sign.
Yeah, I think we're all expecting him to get better. All right, Bill, it's time. The list that every sports media personality has talked about over the last week, the top 60 quarterbacks of the 2000s. What all went into the list? Obviously, you're very much a data-driven guy, but what were kind of the main factors that helped you compile this list, which everyone now hates you for?
Yeah. Well, it was, I mean, I always start with stats for sure. Like I pulled all the eligible quarterbacks. You basically, my one rule was you had to play 2 years in the 2000s because it was really tricky trying to figure out like, what do I do with Michael Vick? If he played in 2000 and he was Michael Vick, but his good year was 99. He was hurt in 2000. So does he rank? Does he not? And it was just hurt in my head. Josh Heupel being another one, obviously. So I just basically said you had to play at least 2 years in the 2000s. But so went back and pulled all the passing stats that, of all the eligible players during that time. And first thing I tried to do was compare their performance to that year's performance, because obviously the quarterback position has changed dramatically in the last 20 years. But, compare how you did in 2000 to how other 2000 quarterbacks were doing, and kind of created a scale for that. And, looked at all the basic stuff, the yards and the yards per pass and the passer rating. And
so
and
that's
all those
basically,
things.
So that's how you kind of factored in how the game has changed in general, right? Okay. Right. Yeah, that's very smart. I should not be surprised.
Well, and so basically I started with that and kind of created a general scale for like, you were 97th percentile in 2001, that kind of thing. Excuse me. And so I was able to then look at like, what was your best year? And I was able to compare every quarterback's best years. That was one way. Look at their averages, look at their totals. Just kind of, it ended up basically that I had to create a few different lists, because if you just think about trying to compare Cam Newton to Baker Mayfield, how in the world do you do that? Cam Newton had probably the single best season for a quarterback ever, unless Joe Burrow topped him last year. But Cam Newton he had 2,900 career passing yards. Baker Mayfield did that like half a season, and he played 4 seasons. So like comparing those two was really hard. And it ended up being kind of a list of standout characteristics. Like, was your best year among the best ever? Was your career total among the best ever? Were your averages among the best ever? And created a bunch of different, a multi-year quarterbacks list and a single year explosion quarterbacks list. And then just slowly kind of sewed them together, like compared the top name in each category and said, okay, who do I think, who should be ahead of whom here? Should it be Baker? Should it be Cam? Should it be whoever? And then just slowly worked my way back and ended up, the craziest part about this exercise, and nobody likes this, this is not good rationale. But basically there were 6 guys who absolutely could have been number 1 without a doubt. Newton, Mayfield, Young, Tebow, Burrow, Watson, any of them could have easily been number 1. And I think, it would have been the same level of complaining, but it would have been acceptable. 19 guys probably should have been in the top 10. Like if you had asked me beforehand, where's Kellen Moore going to be? I'd say, probably top 10, surely, right? Tua or Andrew Luck. Well, surely they're top 10. There are 19 of those guys. So only 10 of them made the top 10. So that was hard. And then there were approximately, I think, my initial list had basically everybody I thought should be considered for the top 60. It was 115 guys. So like it was just impossible. Basically, there was absolutely no way to fit in all the names and put them where I felt they deserved, because there had just been too many good quarterbacks in the last 21 years. So that's been like, as guys, you know, I've had people complain. AJ McCarron actually is a name that's come up a lot. You know, he didn't make the list. Probably should have. I can say that because yeah, he was really good. He probably should have made the list, but I don't know who I'd eliminate from the list for him. Brandon Weeden was an interesting one, by the way. I put because Mason Rudolph kind of cleared that volume bar because he threw for like 13,000 something yards. He did make the list. Brandon Weeden, like his stats weren't quite what I remembered them, and he didn't get much Heisman. You know, he didn't get much. I don't remember what his vote total was, but it wasn't very much. And he really didn't end up with any kind of standout trait. He almost led Oklahoma State to a national title game, so he should have probably been on the list. I don't know who I would have bumped out ahead of him. It was just an impossible thing. And so when people say that so-and-so should have been there, and I say, yeah, you're probably right, that doesn't seem to satisfy them very much.
Right. Who on the list showed up whenever you punched in all the data? Who showed up on the list to where you were like, dang, I didn't realize that this guy was actually this good, and maybe at the time we didn't realize what a talent he was?
In the write-up, I mentioned that I felt like Marcus Mariota, we almost don't. He won the Heisman. He made the national title game, but I feel like he kind of gets underappreciated now. Mm-hmm. His 2014 stats, like 5,200 combined passing and rushing yards, 57 touchdowns. Now Joe Burrow topped that. Almost nobody else has topped. I don't think anybody else has topped that. So that was one of those where, for whatever reason, maybe it was the pro, you know, because we've seen how these guys have or haven't done in the pros, and that it impacts our perceptions to whatever level. But just laying the names out in a spreadsheet, that was one where I was like, damn, that guy was like, I was not giving that guy enough credit. And then there are other guys that, as I wrote the blurbs, I started at 60 and wrote up from there. As I kind of wrote them out or saw their stats next to somebody else, I had to move. Like Colin Kaepernick went up a bunch. You know, maybe he wouldn't get enough credit because it was Nevada, but the stats he produced, Nevada, sorry, I get yelled at for that. But the stats he produced,
and you can say whatever you want. Everything's accepted here.
We don't care how you say Nevada. It doesn't bother us one bit.
But you know, the stats he produced, and in the system that became so influential, I ended up moving him up a few spots. So it really was kind of a process of guys were still kind of moving up and down as I wrote it. But yeah, as far as good stats go, somehow I think we don't appreciate Marcus Mariota enough when he won all the awards and almost won the national title.
Quick break. Do you own a business? If you do, you need Insurica in your life. Insurica is one of the country's largest insurance brokers with 30 offices throughout Oklahoma, Texas, and the Southwest. Insurica is able to customize programs by accessing the latest information from many insurance carriers. They compare and contrast coverage offerings and pricing in order to design a cost-effective, comprehensive program to meet your business's specific needs. Insurica's clients become best-in-class businesses by working with Insurica's team of advisors to manage risk. Purchasing insurance is only one way to protect your business. Best-in-class businesses win by avoiding a loss in the first place. If your business partners with Insurica, you'll save huge amounts of money and take back control of your total cost of risk. I'm an Insurica client, and you should be too. If your business wants to be best in class, connect with Insurica at insurica.com. That's INSURICA.com, and tell them we sent you. Also, make sure you stop by Riverwind. Riverwind is Oklahoma City's premier casino experience. There are temperature screenings at all entrances, and masks are required for all patrons and employees because your safety is Riverwind's #1 priority. There are so many reasons why Riverwind is consistently voted OKC's #1 casino, but it all starts with their amazing variety of gaming thrills and excitement. Riverwind's beautiful, award-winning environment plays host to more than 2,800 of the latest electronic games with a huge selection of table games, including blackjack, blackjack match, roulette, and craps. No matter what your game, Riverwind has it in spades and hearts. And for March's Kitchen Cash-In, all wildcard members that earn 500 points on their wildcard playing AGS machines will win a Continental Stand mixer. Let's go. If you need help finding your way, just visit riverwind.com. Riverwind Casino, simply the one. Okay, back to the interview. So I was reading the list and I'm scrolling and I get to number 54. And I look at it and I look at it again and I look at it again and it says Patrick Mahomes, Texas Tech. And Bill, that just had to cause you physical pain, I assume, to put him there knowing the blowback you were going to get for it, right?
I think the part of the list that made me laugh out loud the most, aside from having Colt McCoy right ahead of Johnny Manziel, which was something, having 54 through 56 be Mahomes, Todd Reesing, Aaron Rodgers, and having Reesing ahead of Aaron Rodgers just made me like that.
He
screams
was good
college
at Kansas,
football.
man. That dude could sling it.
It was a beautiful thing. It was a reminder that college football quarterbacks are all shapes and sizes, I guess. But Mahomes,
well, I mean, if you went back a couple more years, Tom Brady probably wouldn't be on the list either.
No, Matt Ryan wasn't on the list. He threw way too many picks. But Mahomes at 54, because like in college, he was basically a high upside BJ Simmons. Like BJ Simmons' stats gave him a case to be on the list too. But he's Patrick Mahomes and he became Patrick Mahomes. And so it was really hard to place him just right. If I went simply by system and yards per pass and all that, he was asked to throw 50 passes a game. So of course his volume stats were good, but like he was borderline whether he gets included on the list or not. I put him on there because I remembered watching him and how far he could throw the ball and all that. But yeah, that was the best exercise. That was my proof that I really am focusing on college here. I'm not letting the pro success or lack thereof impact this list very much, because yeah, it was. And of course, somebody pointed it out to him and he tweeted it out on Friday. Oh, dang, couldn't even make the top 50. But I mean, I think I can justify it. Like he's amazing and he could throw the ball a million yards. But I mean, his stats are still his stats in college, I guess.
They lost. So he threw for 800 and something yards against Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And then I think they lost the next week. They scored like 6 points. It got beat like 50-6 by Iowa State or something crazy like that. So, yeah. I mean, it does make sense. Were you shocked? Because I think we get, whenever we remember players and how great they were, and it's not that they weren't, but were you shocked whenever you went back and just saw how drastic the change is in statistics for guys now compared to then? And do you have an explanation as to why it's gone that way?
Yeah, I mean, it is funny. 34 and 35 on the list are Ken Dorsey and Mac Jones. And basically the way I framed it was like Ken Dorsey was the early 2000s Mac Jones. Dorsey played three? I think he was the starter.
God, that's a great comparison.
Well, I think he basically played for most of 3 years. He ended up with 9,500 career yards, so about 3,000 per year ish, something in that neighborhood. Mac Jones ended up with over 6,000 career passing yards. He started 1 year, and it wasn't even a full. Like he didn't even get 15 games for making the national title game. He only played 13 games, and a few last year. He ended up with over 6,000 career yards, 74% completion rate. Ken Dorsey had a 58% completion rate. It really is. I mean, the college coaches figuring out, going back to, Mike Leach, going back to Joe Tiller, I guess, in the late 90s, the guys that started really figuring out how to throw the ball safely and efficiently, trickling down to high schools to where the prospects are a little more developed when they get to college. It's all these little things that started happening a long time ago. The Big 12 offenses in the 2000s, all those Texas quarterbacks, all these things just started adding up. And I think coaches have started to realize they can do more with the quarterback position than maybe they thought they could 20 years ago. And so, I mean, there's no question that the game has developed in that regard. It's more efficient to throw the ball a little bit more than maybe you would have before. I mean, that was Mike Leach is crazy, but he and Hal Mumme certainly figured that out before everybody else. Like it's not the old, three things can happen and two are bad kind of thing. You could just throw the ball a lot and it'll probably work out okay for you. And I last summer I wrote a thing about LSU, their success being kind of like bringing the spread revolution to a close. It's over. The spread won. Everybody runs the spread now. Spread is pro style now. All of those things. all of these developments have come with more passing and more passing yards, and it's been super fun to watch.
Okay, you have 6 OU guys on your list. 6. And, we obviously are very familiar with the great run of quarterbacks that OU has had. But I was very glad to see Landry Jones on there. He was my quarterback in college, and he checks in at number 36, which I think a lot of people saw that, and they're like, damn, that's high. But I loved your description, and I actually wrote it down. Quote, "It was hard to appreciate his steady excellence in real time, but by the time he had graduated, he'd put together a 4-year statistical resume that even in the near decade that has followed, no one has surpassed." Why is it so hard for people to appreciate what he did at OU, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, big wins, whatever, didn't, threaten to win the national title, I guess. I mean, there were plenty of other issues. I think if I remember right, I mean, that's kind of when the defenses started to decline a little bit for Bob Stoops. But yeah, actually, I'm going to pull up, so his first year was 2009, right? Like he was 2009 through 12. Is that right?
Correct.
He was true. He got thrust in, and Sam Bradford got hurt in 2009.
So I would assume part of there's no question that OU fans. There's no question that OU fans. Well, I like my friends at the Lost Ogle there in Oklahoma City. I've met them before. Dude just hates Landry Jones. Like it's just like it's a personal all-time resentment.
It's accurate.
And I think part of it is that
kind of hates me too, by the way.
That's kind of his thing. He's a lovable hater, I guess. But it kind of Bradford's injury kind of ruined 2009. I think maybe that's just part of it right there. Like he couldn't come in and immediately be Sam Bradford. Maybe there's some resentment from that. But on offense, they went from 36th in 2009. They were first in 2008, of course, because that was the greatest offense I've ever seen. But 36th in 2009, 17th in 2010. 7th in 2011 and 2nd in 2012. Just consistently got a little better each year, threw for millions and millions of yards. I guess, honestly, it might just come down to the simple fact that they did lose a couple games that they somehow, there's no way they should have lost. They figured out a way to lose. I think OU was kind of due some of those losses, if we're being honest, because they won a whole heck of a lot of games in the Big 12 before that. And maybe it's as simple as that. He was associated with the types of losses, to Missouri in 2010, one of my favorite moments ever. Then losing ground to Baylor after that. Maybe it's just all those other factors. But for whatever reason, he managed to throw for 16,000 career yards and not be all that beloved when he left. It's really hard to pull that off.
Jason White, that's who I played with. He won the Heisman Trophy in 2003. Had another really good year, 2004. We remember, Oklahoma fans remember him as the double knee brace guy that, was out there in the pocket. But whenever he first started at Oklahoma, was an incredible athlete, was a phenomenal basketball player in high school, got recruited to play basketball. So how difficult is it to look at a guy that changes, not necessarily in a negative way, but goes from one type of player to a completely different type of player throughout his tenure?
Yeah, he was one of those guys that, well, first of all, I mean, I graduated high school in Weatherford, Oklahoma in 1997. Like I was still like, that was right when he was kind of building his legend in Tuttle. Like I remember, like he was the sure thing, ridiculous athlete, just like unbelievable prospect for his athleticism. So yeah,
hold on, I had no idea you were from Oklahoma. What the hell?
Coach Trent Rattery. Trent Rattery's older brother is best high school friend right there.
You were a Weatherford Eagle?
I was a Weatherford Eagle who was at both semifinal games in 1999, by the way. I'm pointing to.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Gosh.
And the finals, actually.
You didn't go to that championship game in Stillwater.
I did come back to Stillwater for that championship game. I think I enjoyed
Run the analytics on that thing, would you?
Yeah, that
99. What a small world. I've been reading your shit for years. I had no idea.
I didn't either. Wow.
0 clue. That's awesome.
No, I was in the family section of the OU Missouri game in 2007 at Owen Field because of the Ratteries. And I had my Mizzou shirt on, but I had to put an OU shirt on over top of it. So anyway, yes, I do remember the original Jason White, and in the end, he was, you know, doing the era comparison that I did helped him out a lot, obviously, because you look at his numbers now, barely like 2 career rushing touchdowns for Jason White. Mega athlete Jason White is crazy, but 7,900 passing yards and 81 touchdowns is good, but you don't really see why that stands out. But in 2003, doing what he did, in 2004, doing what he did, it stood out a lot more. And one of the things I incorporated into these numbers as well, just as another form of input, was Heisman votes, just to, as a way of reminding myself how people were regarded at the time. And I mean, dude won the Heisman and didn't he come close the second time? I think like top 3 or 4 the next year. Like he was,
Adrian probably would have won
right.
Either one of them had the other guy not been there.
Yeah. And so, I mean, like that's when you're that well regarded and your offense has scored that many points and you still produce what is for the time very, very heavy passing yards, like that gets you on the list for sure. And he's one of those, like Troy Smith being right around there too. Like, yeah, Troy Smith is 31. I put them right together. You know, the last game of the season sometimes very much impacts how we remember a guy. And for both White and Smith, obviously the last game of their last couple seasons was that changed things pretty dramatically for both.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting that you took those championship games into account. Now, I won't lie. I saw Jalen Hurts at number 23 and I was surprised because, and it's kind of weird, Bill, because he's got this weird relationship with OU fans. Like he was incredibly productive here, but for some reason it didn't feel the same because he had come from Bama. It's hard to describe, but I mean, 23 is high for him. So like, is his career a little underappreciated by people because of what happened with Tua and him getting benched and that type of stuff at Bama and then going to OU? Is that kind of how you see it?
I think so. I mean, we got a very, very clear impression of his limits, I guess you could say. Like with he was a little more robotic than like Tua was when Tua replaced him, in that like he would make the right read at all times, and he could fight for extra yardage. He could do all these things, but if defenses could match your talent, you could kind of bait him into making certain reads. You could contain him maybe a little bit more. But he was such a good runner, and he was still a better passer than I think a lot of people even thought. I mean, 9,400 career passing yards and 3,200 career rushing yards. That's an average of what, almost like 2,500 passing yards and 800 rushing yards per year. He didn't start one of those years. He barely played in his junior season, and he still averaged that. So, I mean, I think, you know, just that was one of those where he started as a true freshman. He was SEC Offensive Player of the Year as a true freshman, and he just played so much and got the opportunity to play in so many big games that A, his stats ended up pretty great, and B, because he played in so many big games, he played against a lot of good defenses and occasionally didn't look amazing. So I just think his success on the opportunity to kind of understand his limits. I think he was one of the best quarterbacks in recent college football history. He would have been. I'd have loved it, you know, as a Mizzou guy. I would have sure loved it if he had played for Mizzou for 4 years.
Also, make sure you contact our friends at Advanced Weight Loss Clinic of Sand Springs. They'll help you execute a realistic and achievable weight loss plan designed for you and only you. They've got all kinds of treatments for men and women. Their licensed and trained experts combine diet and exercise with hormone therapies to maximize your results. If you're struggling with low libido or low energy, Advanced Weight Loss Clinic of Sand Springs can help with that too. They also offer Botox and fillers. To get on the path to losing weight, call 918-241-LOSE or visit their Facebook page. If you mention the podcast, you will get a free fat burner injection. All right. And don't forget to send your children to Bishop McGuinness Catholic High School. Bishop McGuinness Catholic High School has a long tradition of educational excellence. They know that children need to be in school and are doing everything possible to make that happen. Bishop McGuinness students were welcomed back last August and saw very few interruptions in 2020. With a 12-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio, no student is overlooked. Bishop McGuinness's college prep curriculum offers 22 AP courses. If you want to provide the best possible educational and spiritual development for your children, contact Bishop McGuinness Catholic High School or visit bmchs.org. Financial aid is available. Okay, back to the interview.
Sammy B, we got to talk about Bradford. That you mentioned it, that '08 offense is, you said the greatest offense you've ever seen. And we've seen some teams kind of replicate that here recently. But compared to the peers at the time, it was ridiculous. So talk about just a little bit of what you saw whenever you dug back into the numbers in '08 and how it compared really to that era.
Yeah, I mean, basically playing 2 years and throwing for 8,400 yards, whatever that was, 13 and 14 years ago is pretty ridiculous in and of itself. But I think the most interesting thing about thinking back on the '08 team, especially, like, I've been able to talk to Kevin Wilson about those offenses a couple of times. It's one of my favorite things to do is to get him going about those that '08 offense, and him talking about how, like, we can go from big to little without substituting, and we can go really fast. And this is 2008, so nobody knew how to stop a really high tempo offense yet. And obviously that's changed a little bit. But then you just think about, like,
you make a defensive lineman roll around on the ground and grab his ankle.
Exactly.
Right?
Correct.
That's what we've come up with in the last 15 years.
But I mean, just, they had Jermaine Grisham, who was awesome. He had DeMarco Murray when Murray was healthy. That's great. His receivers were good. Like, I mean, Iglesias was good. Manny Johnson was good. It wasn't Jamar Chase, it wasn't Devontae Smith. They were just good receivers. And the fact that they, whatever it was, 58 or more points, and Wilson will point out, like, we could have scored 60 against Kansas State if we wanted to. We called off the dogs at halftime. But the fact that they were able to put up those absurd numbers, they're still absurd now, point totals, with what was basically a very good but not elite skill core is crazy. And Bradford's decision-making was just perfect for so much of those times. And his, 2 passes basically against Florida, if he completes 2 extra passes in the red zone against Florida, he's in the top 10.
That's really interesting to think about, the receiving core of that '08 team. Like, I hadn't thought about the receivers on that team in a while. And Teddy and I were talking about OU quarterbacks the other day, and I still think if I could pick one guy, if it came down to making one accurate throw, I'm taking Bradford. I know that Kyler and Baker have been ridiculous, but man, that dude could spin the football. Now, Kyler Murray, number 7 on your list, 1 spot in front of Lamar Jackson, who checks in at number 8. I assume the passing is kind of what separated Kyler there, but just how ridiculous was it when you just kind of dove into his stats? I mean, that year he had was absurd.
Yeah, it took all year. That was one of the most enjoyable years. Maybe it's because we all assumed he was playing baseball, and therefore we didn't have to spend the entire year arguing about whether he'd be a good draft pick or not. Like, it was just a clean slate to just watch him play football and enjoy it. But that, the stats he produced that year, he succeeds what is apparently the number 1 quarterback of the 2000s, and basically outdoes him from a stat perspective. It was absolutely nuts. And I don't know, 4,361 passing yards and 1,478 rushing yards in a season. That's not supposed to happen. That was, Mizzou fans have been yelling at me for not including Brad Smith on this list. And I mean, I loved Brad Smith, and he was the first guy to average 2,000 passing yards and 1,000 rushing yards in a season. Kyler Murray almost went for 4,500 or 1,500 in a season, just like a decade later, basically. And it really was, you see some single season, some supernova guys in there. Cam Newton was the top one. Vince Young wasn't quite a single season guy. He was like 1.5 season, but Burrow's there at 5. And you could honestly, if he had won a national title, maybe if he had won a couple extra games, maybe he gets higher. But I had no problem with putting Kyler ahead of, some amazing quarterbacks, Lamar and Mariota and Lawrence and all these guys. Like, that one season he had was utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, I've got no argument with where Kyler is. Okay, so that brings us to Baker Mayfield, number 1. And you already mentioned that any one of about 6 or 7 guys had a claim to that number 1 spot. So my real question is, what fan base has delivered the most hatred for the Baker Mayfield number 1 overall? And Does anyone know that you're from Oklahoma, or is the cat out of the bag now? Should you have not said that on our podcast?
I thought that people knew that, but it's one of those things where I mentioned it like 6 years ago on Twitter, and therefore I assume everybody saw it, and that's not the way Twitter works. So, so maybe I thought I was safer than I was, but
we may have to edit that out.
That's right.
We have to go back.
I legitimately, I pulled up your Wikipedia earlier before we were having.
Wait, do I have a Wikipedia?
I think so, or something
snap.
like similar to. Like I pulled something up, and I was like trying to learn as much as I could about you before we had you on. I still had no idea you're from Oklahoma.
Weatherford Eagles. No, so basically, and I did have like a couple people who know me. Basically, they tried to point out that maybe I was biased there, but in the end, like, yeah, I think the top 6 guys: Watson, Burrow, Tebow, Young, Newton, Mayfield. Any of them could have been number 1. And I went with Mayfield primarily because he seemed to be the best combination. His best season, it wasn't Newton, Burrow, well, Kyler even, but it was very, 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 very good. Good enough to win the Heisman, good enough to get drafted number 1 the next year as a 6-footer, or what was he listed at, 6'1", I guess. You know, his upside was there. He cleared the bar from an upside perspective. He cleared the ball from an accomplishments perspective. You know, bringing OU, not bringing them back, but they hadn't won a Big 12 title in a couple of years. They really had ceded control of the conference to a certain degree to other teams. They come in and, you know, started long-term winning streak with him again. 2 college football playoffs, all but makes a college football final in 2017. That seemed to clear the accomplishments bar to me. So really, it was just he had the best combination. Obviously, like Tebow did most of that too. You know, he had his stats weren't quite as his volume stats weren't quite as good, but he played a decade earlier. So you could make a case that you know if Tim Tebow comes around in 2016 through 19 instead of 06 through 09, maybe he matches Mayfield's stats. But he was so efficient. He was so consistent over the course of 3 years. He won stuff. He won the Heisman. He, as I put it in there, like Newton, Young, and Burrow had the best seasons. He had the best career. And I don't mind, even if he didn't win a national title, he accomplished enough to me that it made sense to put him number 1.
So you've put together the list, right? Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's debating it. But I just have one question for you before we let you get out of here, Bill. If you had to pick one guy to win a game, let's say everything else is equal, all the players are equal around him, all of that is eliminated. You have to pick one quarterback off this list to win a football game. Who are you taking?
Probably Cam. I think like I that's why I consider him to have had the best season ever. Like his supporting cast wasn't quite as good as, or wasn't nearly as good as Burrow's. Wasn't nearly as good as what Young or Tebow had. His offensive talent wasn't as good as what Baker had. If he'd played 2 years, even he probably ends up number 1 on this list. But I think I go with Cam Newton to win a game because, you know, he was probably a better passer than Vince Young, I guess. Yeah, I'd say he's a better passer than Vince Young. And I mean, the running, maybe he's just about the only runner more scary than Vince Young.
I've got a suggestion and a question. The question is, as a numbers guy, as a stats guy, as an analytical guy, is there an annoyance? Whether it's that teams don't take the ball when they win the toss, or that they don't go for 2 in a certain situation, or don't go for it on 4th down. Is there something that you see routinely and you're like, why does no one do this properly? It's the easiest thing ever.
Well, I got tired of talking about 4th downs at some point or another, because I think like I'd go to the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference every year, and they'd talk about basketball and baseball, and then football would just be like, oh, in football, like 4th downs, they should go for it more, and then they'd go back to talking about baseball or basketball. So I got kind of tired of it because I thought we talked about it as if it was the only thing that numbers could help in football. But now that numbers are helping, like now that you've got the books, you've got the binders, you can have the logic explained to you. You've seen teams like Army go out and basically go for it on every 4th and 3 and win 10 games. You know, now that we've seen all these examples of how, you know, proper, efficient handling of 4th downs can work, there's no excuse for, say, Lincoln Riley to kick an 18-yard field goal on the first possession of a game, ever.
That's
Like
what I
there's
was
just
hunting for. That's what I was looking for right there. The jab at Lincoln. That was great. Love
no,
it.
the Iowa State, what was it? Was it Iowa State when he did that? And then he did it against
Mm-hmm.
Texas. It was like a 19-yard field goal or something. Like, man, like you've got the best offense in the country on average every single year. Go for the freaking 7 points. Like that's it does. He's really interesting in his combination of being so innovative and interesting and creative and so old school Texan with some of his actual coaching tendencies.
All right, and my suggestion is this, and Gabe, this is really for you. And I would love to know this because in my opinion, the reason for the success at Oklahoma, obviously the quarterback play has been exceptional, but I think it's the offensive line. That's why I think they have so much success. And my argument is that it's not comparable. You can't take Baker Mayfield and have him go play for Kansas State or Kansas and he's going to be the player he is. So there's got to be a way to look at like offensive line or offensive line experience in like where these guys get drafted to see whether it was the quarterback or it was the offensive line. We need to settle that because I'm an offensive line guy.
It gets harder, I think, every year. I think people are starting to accept that sacks are not 100%, but sacks are a quarterback stat too. I think that's been a development that we've seen, especially on the pro
Throw
side.
the damn ball.
Right. I definitely think we've seen a little bit of like just the whatever you want to call it, the overall narrative, I think has shifted on sacks a little bit, which is good. And you know, it colors the way we think back on some guys, I think. But yeah, there is that. I do think it's so ridiculously hard to try to separate out in the game of football. But there are little victories like that. And I think people are starting to understand that sometimes that's the quarterback's fault.
Coming back, Gabe. O-line coming back.
Bill, I really appreciate the time, man. I feel smarter than before this interview, but I also feel dumber than I did before this interview. So it's a weird feeling, but really appreciate the time, man. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Episode 92 in the books. We'll have a new podcast that'll drop Thursday morning. OU legend Ryan Broyles will join us on that episode. Just a reminder, you can hear Teddy from 2 to 6 on Sports Talk 1400. And you can hear me from 3 to 5 on SiriusXM Big 12 Radio, channel 375. Hope you all have a great week. Until next time, we appreciate y'all for listening and do what you always do, Oklahoma. Take care of each other.